Welcome everyone to our one of the ones I've been looking forward to the most, and I know you have.
Oh yes.
And the gentleman next to us probably needs no introduction for most of you in the audience. Andre Gower, thank you so much for being here. This is truly exciting. I'm not trying to say that in like a FM radio host thing where everybody's exciting, like, oh my God, it's Boomer and the Nudge. No, this is genuinely exciting to get to talk to you. And Matt, I know you've been a lifelong fan of this movie.
Absolutely.
But Andre, thank you for being here.
My pleasure. I mean, thanks for having me. These are always fun to get together and chat and interact with cool people that you don't get to do every day.
Sure. I want to selfishly ask the first question, but Matt has been the lifelong fan of this movie, so it would be horrible for me to step on that for him. So please kick off. No, I'm saying I have a question, but I want you to kick off the discussion.
Okay, yeah. Well, thank you. I was like, wait, you want me to know what question you're
No.
But yeah, again, thank you for being here. I know a lot of our audience is really excited for this. Monster Squad is, for so many people out there, and as your documentary really accentuates on, was kind of a seminal film for my generation, for just the Gen X generation. And the fact that that the theater kind of tried to bury it, and DVD kind of tried to bury it, and then it just came back from the dead, no pun intended, is kind of just such a great thing. And we talked about having you on last year towards the end of our planning process, and it was right around the time that you had your health scare.
You mean the massive heart attack? Yes,
the massive heart attack. Yeah. The walking death, is that what they call it? Or
that's something like that.
I'm assuming that's because you were traveling all over the world like a jet setter, meeting thousands of Monster Squad fans, and you just finally said, you know what, we're going to take a break. Like your body, I mean, yeah.
So first of all, we're just really. Yeah, we're just really glad that you made it through that, and that you're still around for us to do this.
Look, well, first of all, I appreciate that. Thank you too. I am glad I'm still around as well. And sorry I missed last year, but here we are today. So we'll make up for a little bit of lost time.
Well, tell us a little bit about. I really want to know about. We watched the documentary, but I'd really like to know what it's like for you to be meeting all of these fans in all of these different countries and in all of these different scenarios for a film that they wouldn't let die. In other words, it was never even on life support. It was always alive in the minds of these kids who had grown up. And you decided, I want to meet as many of them as possible. Like, what motivated that? Because a lot of movie stars wouldn't do that. And you, and like I said earlier, it seems Bill Allen from Rad has also really done that. He's really embraced the cycling community. What made you want to do that?
Well, I think at the very beginning, when we kind of had this resurgence in 2006, after that original kind of cast reunion screening at the Alamo Drafthouse in Austin, Texas, we were like, oh, people care about this. Like, this is like they remembered this. And then we realized that a lot of people, there's a handful of people that really liked this movie. And then we started doing conventions. And then that event led to the 2007 actual 20th anniversary DVD, which went bonkers. I mean, that blew up. And then we were like going to more appearances and special screenings and conventions and signings. And we're like, oh, this is interesting. How cool to, it's like, it's nice to get a little, kind of recognition. And it's neat to meet these people that, really like this movie and never had an outlet to either express that or meet any of us, for so long. And we thought it wouldn't last very long. We said, Ryan Lambert, Ashley Bank, Fred and I, we would get together and be like, this is kind of interesting. Like, you think we'll have another thing at the end of the summer, or it's over? And that was 2007, and it hasn't stopped.
Yeah.
And not only did it not die off or peter out, it just kept getting stronger and stronger. And, kind of that trajectory just kept building. And what that was is it could continue to go up because that foundation was getting stronger, because more of the people and the original fans were coming out of the woodwork and just kind of cementing together and just propping it all up,
Mhm.
which was very cool. And that gave it a little more longevity and some legs to, kind of this flash in the pan kind of resurgence, dynamic.
Yeah.
What we really started understanding after time is that for there's a lot of movies out there that people are big fans of. Like, we all have our favorites, some's Monster Squad, some's, Star Wars, some's, Freddy. And they're like, oh, it's my favorite. I love that movie. It's a thing, but they don't, it doesn't, Monster Squad made a connection with people. And for some reason that we were starting to see and starting to understand, and we were listening to these stories of these fans, these individuals and these groups that would come up to us on a constant basis, and then the internet, and they were expressing this, and then all these events we got to go to. And after a couple of years of doing that, we all realized that there was something different about Monster Squad fans. They have a different connection to this movie than most fans of other movies, and I didn't see the same kind of dynamic. And then I started thinking about, there's a story there. And so I want to start listening to this stuff a little bit deeper, and not just enjoying kind of the attention coming this way.
Sure.
And then I realized that those fans' stories were a story, and then it got really interesting.
Wow.
What just kind of expounding on that, and obviously I don't want you to truncate the entire documentary into one answer, but because your documentary kind of does answer this question, but what do you personally think is the main reason for that longevity and for that effect that it had on people?
I actually think it was a number of things, and any one of those 5 or 6 or 8 things that you can point at, I think, take precedence on any given day when you're talking about the topic. I think what it actually boils down to is a couple main things. One is the timing. One is the way this story was delivered. And it really came down to the way that, even though we have a very stereotypical cliche group of kids, it was delivered and portrayed in a manner that it wasn't being talked about kids. It was being delivered by kids,
right,
through the lens of something where everybody related to. And if I had to distill it down to 2 words, I've distilled it down to heart and authenticity. That really came across. And these kids, yeah, it's a fantastical movie. It's the Universal monsters fighting the little rascals. We get that. It's crazy. But it's the way that these kids, whenever they saw it, whether a few of them saw it in the theater or they got it on HBO or at their local video store, they connected with it and went, that's me. Not only this adventure story, we all want to get on our bikes and go down up in the hills and save the world. We all want to do that. But this was given and delivered in a way, from a point of view, that I think actually connected, because it had some authenticity to it and had some realism, even though it's a fantasy movie about monsters. But there's like, this is us, this is me. And then the aspect that's where it's a group of misfits that are only friends with each other, and then they got to find each other, and they're the ones that know what's going on. And supporting each other, and banding together as a group to solve a problem. I think that kind of hit home with kids, whether they knew it or not, and then it kind of manifests later on. And that's why that tether to this movie doesn't break,
right?
Because I think it's got archetypes and themes and characters that transcend time, because it's just about being human. And I don't think Fred and Shane were actually going for that when they were typing words on a page.
Sure,
but it happened. Yeah, and those are some of the stories that we got over time, and I think that's very neat. And I think most of it comes across that way from Fred and Shane, because Fred and Shane were just out of being kids themselves.
Yeah, they were right out of college.
It wasn't
right?
it wasn't too 52-year-old, old dude screenwriters going, what are the kids saying that's really funny and hip today?
Hello, fellow youngsters.
Yeah. And it had that enthusiasm with it, and that, like I said, heart and authenticity that I think kind of really pierced everybody.
Well, I was talking. It's funny that you said that, because I was talking to somebody earlier today that had never seen this as a child, and they've only seen it as an adult. And she was kind of saying, well, what appealed to you about this movie? And to me, as a 10-year-old watching this movie when it came out, you guys in the movie acted like my friends and I acted. Like you were like real kids living your lives, riding your bikes the same way we did, where you crisscross in front of each other and hanging out in a clubhouse in the tree in the backyard. And it was like we were watching a cutaway of another group of kids in another town living their lives, and then this crazy fantastical thing happens to them, and then they answer the call.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's what resonated with me as a kid, where it was like, yeah, it's like this could happen to me tomorrow, you know?
And Scott Knudsen, thank you for the super chat. He says, I think the enduring appeal of the movie is that while we could never actually be a Jedi or a Ghostbuster, we totally could get together with our friends and have a monster squad, even if we never actually found Dracula. You know, I was, when I watched the documentary, Andre, I couldn't help but foil it against another documentary, Best Worst Movie. Mm-hmm. And we were talking about the enduring appeal of Monster Squad. In Best Worst Movie, which is about Troll 2, at the end of that documentary, you see the actors who have felt this kind of resurgence for this movie, and they've been going around meeting the fans of the film. They start to become soured because they start to feel like everybody just likes this movie ironically because the movie is very poor. Yeah. Right. Whereas with Monster Squad, it's a movie that was not at all close to being poor. It was an excellent film that got lost in the shuffle. And I keep thinking that because you're talking about and said earlier, people really connected with this movie. The genuine connection from my vantage point when compared with Best Worst Movie comes from the fact that Monster Squad was one, competently written, competently acted, competently directed. It was a good story, and it had something genuine to say. Yeah. And it wasn't something where you just threw plastic spoons at it in the theater and laughed with your friends and then went and had a beer. You know, it wasn't that kind of movie. Anyway, I had a question at the end of that, and I talked my way out of, because I'm 44, so I talked my way out of it. So,
well, I think where that was kind of going with whatever question was going to percolate there, it comes down to the difference of movie types like that. Mm-hmm. They may start out on a similar path, but they kind of diverge there, and our path ends up in a fact that, in contrast to something like Troll 2, which I'm not bad mouthing the movie or bad mouthing people. No. There's not a legion of fans that can't wait until their own kids are 7, 8, or 9 to show them Troll 2.
Right.
And most of our, they're like, I can't wait to show my kid your movie.
Yeah.
Because this means so much to me. And then now those kids have seen it, and we have a whole second generation of Monster Squad fans that are legit, second OG generation Monster Squad fans, because like I said, those archetypes and those themes and those characters, they hit no matter, what generation we're in.
Yeah. And I'm so glad you brought that up, because Matt and I were talking about this in the lead up to this. This movie introduced an entire generation to the classic movie monsters, as we call them. And yet it did it in its own distinct way, of course. But you guys were kids making the movie. I just have this quick 7-second clip here showing all the classic monsters converging together. And then I have a question, and I promise I won't forget which question it is. So they're all there. They're all there for this movie. And I just wanted to ask, how much did you know about these characters before you took the role? And then after you got done with the film, did it spur a lifelong interest at any level in these characters? Or were you just like me and you were like, well, I'm not really a horror guy. I like Bela Lugosi enough, but it's not really my wheelhouse like my wife,
Growing up, you get to, especially growing up in the industry, you get to see things or be exposed to movies or different stories that maybe, a kid in the neighborhood that doesn't have that access. But yeah, we grew up watching television. This is way before the internet, way before cable, and I grew up in LA, which we actually had more stations to show programming than most. And, Saturday mornings, late night, Friday, late night Thursday nights on the syndicated channels, you get to see old, sci-fi movies, old monster movies, old war movies. Saturday afternoons, or Saturday morning started with cartoons. and then Kung Fu Theater, and then some old, Audie Murphy or John Wayne movie in the afternoon.
Yeah.
And, I watched a lot of that. And so I got exposed to all of that as a wide swath. If I had to kind of generalize myself at the time, was I like a big monster kid or horror kid? No, I was into sci-fi, and I was into kind of action and a little bit, I started to become more of like a World War II kind of interest, just because my dad, that's his era, and we would watch those movies together. And then we loved Cold War spy movies. That was that was it. Anything from, if Gene Hackman was in it, it's Cold War spy movie. Bond is sort of on in that vein, but more kind of campy adventure.
Right.
But those are great stuff. The monster movies were, you could watch them late at night. Didn't matter if the only TV you had in your bedroom was a shitty black and white TV, because they were black and white anyway. And but and then to kind of converge and understand that you're doing a story on a set that's combining all of those kind of old vintage, were they even vintage then? I mean, some of these movies were only 30 years old. Those movies were newer now than Monster Squad is today to this current time.
Oh my
God.
So it's
so old.
Well, you're old. Get in it. But you see those, and you know these stories. Dracula, Frankenstein's monster. Whether you're exposed to it with the campy Abbott and Costello fun comedies, or Young Frankenstein, which is probably everybody asks me about horror, and I just say up front, it's like, look, do I like horror films? Of course. Am I in one? You can call it horror. It's a gateway movie. We get these great monsters, change the game. Absolutely love being a part of that world. I mean, yes. But my favorite horror movies are sort of the comedies. It's Young Frankenstein, April Fool's Day, and Shaun of the Dead. Those are the best horror movies for me. But knowing at the time what you're doing, that it's never been done before, to have all these iconic, kind of creature faces and stories converge, that's pretty cool. And that shot that you show, I mean, we haven't seen that. That's all the Universal monsters in one frame, and it was kind of cool.
Yeah, it's amazing.
That was kind of like 1987's Marvel Cinematic Universe bringing together all the Avengers, for Universal monsters.
Which I think was the ultimate goal of the dark universe that Universal was trying to do, starting 6-7 years ago with Dracula Untold, and then that didn't happen, and then they're like, oh, this didn't work. Is Tom Cruise available for the moment? And that didn't work.
Yeah, that really didn't work.
They killed the dark universe. But see, now they're doing the dark universe the right way.
Mm-hmm.
They're doing these great stories, which are character and people stories, and monster things, which are actually reflections on culture and society.
Right.
They're giving them smaller budgets, giving them to better storytellers. Now they're doing the Dark Universe through Blumhouse, and they're giving the stories to like Lee Wanell and people like that, and doing Invisible Man with great acting and smaller footprints, which make for better storytelling.
Yeah.
It would be really, really cool to see a Captain America movie that had a $5 million budget.
Yeah. I mean, that's like one of those
sitting there and talking to other people and maybe figuring out who. It's a great story.
Yeah. It's like those Batman serials from the 40s where it's like the Batmobile is just a rusty Packard. And you're like, oh, okay, cool.
Right.
Right. Chris Smith, thank you for the super chat. He says, hey guys, when me and my friends watched this, we all camped out. We were basically a monster squad. And as I lived near Whitby, where Bram Stoker wrote Dracula, we made up stories that he visits our woods. LOL. Stan Solo. Thanks, Chris. Good to see you here, buddy.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
All the way from the UK. See, it's like we have a lot of Monster Squad. There's a lot of UK Monster Squad fans, which are awesome.
Yeah. And Matt, I know you're a lifelong fan, so I'm sure even though you've got a head full of trivia about this movie, I'm sure there are some unanswered questions that you've got.
There are. What was it like with yourself and the young cast on this movie? I know when you have child actors on a set, usually when it's an ensemble of kids like this, did you guys hang out? Did you, on your off days or in your downtime, what did you guys do? Did you guys kind of bond? Were you
Well, you do it. It's always tough when you're putting together sort of a disparate group of kids of different ages that may or may not know each other. And the only other cast member that I knew prior to shooting, I grew up with Robbie Kiger, so we had been friends, for years, going on the same auditions and seeing each other almost every day of the week for, most of our young lives. I had met Ryan Lambert a couple weeks before we started shooting, and that was it. So it takes a little time to kind of feel your way around. It's no different than going to a new school or going to, a camp. But the difference is there's $1 million, multi-million dollars of budget going around you, and you're not at camp, you're a professional, and there's a lot of work. There's a lot of work to do. And there's a lot of protocols, procedures, and constraints and restraints that are surrounding you that you have to work inside of. So that's where that really kind of starts. Is it fun? Yes. Is it hard work? Yes. Is it a lot of work? No doubt. And I think everybody did a fabulous job of doing what they're supposed to do, while at the same time maintaining the fact that we're all young kids and being able to kind of keep that exuberance and that youthful energy instead of just kind of being like, robotic automatons, stepping on a mark and reading a line. But yeah, we got to hang out. I mean, you mentioned two funny things, like downtime or off time. It's like there wasn't that much downtime or off time because, for those of you who don't know, kids in the entertainment business, there are labor laws, and you can only be on the set for so many hours total. You can only be you can be on the location for so many hours in total. You can only be on set for a less amount. You have to have school every day by law, and all those hours in the day change depending on what age group you're in.
Right.
And so when you have a multifaceted, diverse group of kids, it's all screwed up, and it's a very hard production to do. That's why they say don't work with kids or animals.
Yeah.
Right.
That must have been hard because
they're usually unpredictable. I think we had a great group of main cast members. Look, the kids are the kids, and they're the squad. But we had an amazing, not only the production crew and all the effects, and Fred and Shane and Peter and Jonathan Zimbert and all that were fabulous. But we had awesome adults in this movie too. They're just not in a lot of it, but when they're in it, they are fantastic. Yeah. And from Jack Willem to David Proval, and it's insane who's in this movie, and not even mentioning Mary Ellen Trainor and Stephen Mock and things and John Grease, but we're the bulk of the movie. Yeah, and that's a lot of work, and I think we did a pretty good job. And but we were all friendly. We all ended up getting used to each other and hanging out. And we became a team.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of the adult cast, I love in this film how straight all of the characters treat what's happening in the film, and they play it. They don't play it as like, oh, here's a goofy thing. I mean, they play it. 100% real. And one of the little pieces of acting in this film that I just absolutely love, talking about Stephen Mock, is the fight that he and Mary Ellen Trainor get in. And it's short. It's a short little scene, but it is so intense and naturalistic. It's like you're watching two people that are married fight. And
ironically, as almost sort of a dark part of the story, that's a scene that a lot of kids connected with. Especially in the mid 80s. This was happening a lot, and they were like, oh, that's my house. You mentioned that scene in particular. It's a great little tidbit, but it's really only seen from my perspective or Sean's perspective. But that was actually a much longer scene. They actually had the camera in the room. They had coverage. They shot that scene for like hours and hours, and they just didn't use it. And it's like 5 times as long. And I only come in at the end of it and then do the thing. But everything kind of got trimmed and cut. Steven talks about that scene a lot. He's like, we really knocked out and dragged out that fight scene, and it had nothing to do with just over the shoulder of Sean looking through the louvers there. It was an actual scene that meant something in the story of the movie, because this family's falling apart while Dracula's in town trying to take over the world. So I think, again, with some authenticity, a kid's connected with, my parents do the same thing in the other room while they think I'm doing my homework.
Speaking of trimming, not to interrupt you, but one of my only gripes, and Michael also has the same one, is the short runtime on this film. And I know there had to be just a ton of footage that got cut, that got removed. Can you speak a little bit to that?
It's perfect, because it flows into a little bit of what we were talking about a second ago. Is you were talking about how straight the adults play it and what's going on. It's not played incredulous or campy. One of the things in the original drafts of the script, which was 40 pages longer or something.
Oh, wow.
Was the fact that these kids, we got to see how into the stuff these kids were. they were experts in the monster lore, in the literature, in the books, in the history, in the old movies, in the old TV shows, in the comics. And we got to see that on the page in the original drafts. We don't really see that in the final cut. The other thing, that shows, along with the adults in the film, that something's going on. We're the only ones that realize it, and they're not buying it because it's not real. And then it's that the adults aren't getting it, and the kids are the only ones that have to step up and do it. So I thought that was an interesting, cool part about the original kind of drafts. When you talk about just actual TRT, total runtime of a film, this is super short. Although right now, people are really clamoring for a sub 90-minute movies. They really are. And we knew that going in with the documentary. We're like, this is not going to be 91 minutes or more. This is 90 minutes. And then we ended up trimming 3.5. So it's like 86 and change. So it's perfect. That had to do with, there's a lot of scenes that were shot that didn't make it in the final cut. I don't know why. I'm not the editor. I don't even know if Fred knows a lot. We didn't have, if he had final cut. At the time, some of the things were disappointing as they got rewritten or cut on the day, like as we're shooting it, because there's a couple cool scenes in that movie that had, they were kind of benchmark moments, I think, in the whole story. One was the original opening, cold open, when you're in 100 years ago with Van Helsing and his guys. And then one is when we're in the house trying to find the amulet. That was a much larger, deep, almost kind of middle of the movie chase scene, kind of, that spills onto the third act and the final action. And it was much, much deeper, much more complex, and had a lot more to it. And really what it is, if you ask me personally, if you've ever watched, anything that Shane Black has written, if you ever watch anything that Fred Decker has written or that Fred and Shane have written together, most good movies are a series of setups and payoffs. And that goes from inside of each scene to an act to a whole movie. It's a good movie, a good story is a series of setups and payoffs. Monster Squad, the final cut that we see, that we all dig and have fun with, it's 82 minutes of setups that you don't know are setups because you never get the payoff, and then payoffs that you don't know are payoffs because you never got the setup.
Right.
And there was so much good stuff in those original pages that are those cool things. And some are plot holes that people think, some are plot holes, and then some lead to other questions, and some of it was cool stuff that affected characters, like Sean, that doesn't get to go, and we got on the page, there was some cool stuff that we get to do that we didn't get to do on camera.
Yeah, like the whole thing with like the amulet in the book being at that house, like how did it get there? Like how did all that happen? And
and that was there's a little bit of investigation into that. I think we find out that as we see it, we go in, then of course the whole kind of climactic thing with kicking Wolfman and the Nards. We originally go into that house and there was a guy there. And I can't remember if he introduces himself like, I'm a real estate agent or something, or like he's Van Helsing's grandson. I think he was something like that. And this used to be we get a setup right before that with Scary German guy saying, oh, you know a lot about monsters. He goes, yeah, well, if I was a vampire, I wouldn't have a reflection, right? And we go, oh, this scary guy in the neighborhood's kind of cool. He knows monster stuff. And then we get the Holocaust reference, which takes you in a whole other direction. But the next scene is, or the next couple scenes, we're in the house trying to find the amulet, and there's a guy there. And he invites us in and says, I'm looking for something, maybe you can help me. And then as we go deeper into the catacombs of this house, like and Sean's character actually sees this in this old mirror and sees the group of us except for this guy. And so we're like, oh shit, we're in trouble. And now we have to okay, we're in trouble, break, but subterranean levels of this house. So then it becomes like this big chase scene with like a Scooby-Doo episode, which I thought was awesome. And each level that we keep going down or tumbling down or going through trap doors or finding a secret exit to get out while each level is a different monster that we encounter. And in the final cut, we see them all on the same floor.
Oh, wow.
And then we get out. So this was happening like as we tumble down into like this subterranean levels of this old weird house that for some reason is maybe been there in this fashion for years and years and years. And Dracula was there trying to lure us in to get the amulet out of them he can't go in. And so he needed us. And so he was being very tricky and sinister and, getting us, getting us to take it out of the room so he could take it. And
Right.
so that got all crammed into like a day or two of filming, and it should have been like 5 days.
Wow.
And that's, you know, the great story of who was that guy. And there was actually an actor on the set that day as they were rewriting to play that guy, and it was Liam Neeson.
Oh, okay. I always knew that he was somehow a part of that movie. I heard he was cast as Dracula, and then they found Duncan.
He
Ray
auditioned
Gare.
for Dracula.
Yeah, then they went with Duncan Ray Gare, and they were like, well, let's keep him around. And then,
yeah, and you know, I think Neeson auditioned as Dracula, thought he was great, but Duncan Ray Gare came in and was just phenomenal in the audition process and became Dracula in that moment. And then they kept Liam Neeson in mind to be Van Helsing's grandson or whatever that character was, and to be the Dracula with a mask on, like a face, like a rubber mask. Cool kind of chase scene.
You brought up the gentleman that I think this really takes the movie to the next level as far as the writing is when you meet the old man in the neighborhood, and you just mentioned it, how you find out, the audience finds out he's a survivor of a non-fantastical yet truly horrible event.
Monster story.
Yeah.
His own monster story.
I have that little bit of that clip right here.
You sure know a lot about monsters.
Now that you mention it, I suppose I do.
I mean, you talk about a movie being written in a way where they make a conscientious but motivated connection to something tangible that puts into context or informs the rest of this story. I mean, it gives it a lot of credibility is what I'm saying. And also, I think, what we were talking about earlier, the camaraderie that you had with the other kid actors, the other younger actors, seemed very natural. There's nothing in this, as you were mentioning, that felt telegraphed. It didn't feel like, as much as we all enjoy the Dennis the Menace movie with Walter Matthau, we don't really know kids that actually act that way. And so in this case, for example, this is one of those natural moments between your character and your sister.
Can't you read?
Mom says you have to let me in the club or else it's prescription.
That's discrimination, jerkoid. Prescription's drugs, which you're on if you think you're getting up here.
And then this moment with your best friend, this is the kind of conversation that you have walking home from school.
Wolfman doesn't go to work. He's not like a guy.
What are you talking about? He walks around, he wears pants.
He had to wear pants because those movies were made in the 40s. He had to wear them so you wouldn't see his wolf dork.
When you were, I know that you were not coming out of, but you were already a working actor in all kinds of commercials and everything like that. I guess my question is, was that kind of a hard authenticity to achieve? Was that difficult given, the number of different personalities and the age ranges of the kids that you were working with? You were kind of like in the middle of the age range, I get, or maybe more towards the high end of the age range.
Ryan was older.
Yeah, Ryan was older.
Yeah, Ryan's a year older than I am. Then it was me, and then Robbie and I are similar age. Brent was actually a couple years younger than us, and then of course you have Michael and Ashley, who were 5 and 6.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it was difficult. I think what it was just natural.
Mm-hmm.
We all have friends with little sisters or little brothers in the neighborhood, or your own brother or little sister, or your friends that you hang out with and walk home from school with. I think what that is we were kids, we were actual kids, we were playing fictional kids, but you get to marry those together and bring all of that cool stuff together. Look, there's a lot of, there's a handful of good kid group adventure movies of that era. Very few feel natural. So I think there's a few that actually have that kind of connection. Some seem forced, like you're saying before, kids are just kind of acting. And I think a lot of that has to do with the situation and the environment that they're in on a set and the words that they're reading. Again, most of those other movies were written by older people, mostly dudes, and that hadn't been a kid in 35 years.
Yeah.
Fred and Shane were a kid like 8-9 years prior to that. And I think that rings through. So it all worked out. All the stuff that you didn't know was a thing that was going to make it work ended up working. And, you know, that's why I like to think that, you know, something like Monster Squad ends up being, you know, one of those titles that people say it's, you know, one of the better kids adventure movies of, you know, coming of age, of learning things or banding together of that era. And, you know, I think that's cool to be on that list.
Did they allow you to ad lib at all? Like if they had a line written where it's like, this sounds kind of dorky. Let me, you know, did they allow you and Robbie, like during that scene, to say wolf dork instead of, you know, wolf wiener or something like that, you know?
I mean, Wolf Ween would have been funny. That would have been a little West Coast, you know, and I think that, you know, that lends to some of it. It wasn't too much. I think, you know, if something doesn't come out of your mouth right, you know, you can try it again, or you can try another angle. And one of there's not a lot of ad-libbing, especially when you're a kid. You don't, like, you're just trying to do your job. And I don't want to say you stand there and do what you're told, but you know, you're supposed to accomplish something that other people are trying to do. You know, the one instant, you know, there's a few things in there. And Fred and I, as the person that probably has more words of dialogue than anybody in this movie, I've never counted it, but I'm assuming. You know, we talked a lot about delivery or how we wanted to do something, and you can do that while you're shooting a scene. You can prep it and then try to get there. You know, I remember vividly scenes like when I come into the house and if we find the garage and it's the holy shit, oh sorry thing. You know, I was forcing it a little bit, trying to make a thing, and we just had to step back and, you know, don't worry about it, like stumble on it a little bit, or don't worry about it, and you find a way to make it work. But you know, kind of the story is it's actually a great story because I understand it now more than I did at the time. I was a cool kid from LA. I grew up in the Valley and rode my bikes with, you know, the Bill Allen style and you know, in the hills, and the stuff that the kids did in ET. That was actually my neighborhood. We invented that. We invented that. So, you know, I'm this cool kid from LA. I always had good hair and cool clothes and did good characters on TV and films. And I see this line that says, "Kick him in the nards." Like, I don't know that word. That's not a word. That's not a real word. Like, no one says that.
Right.
And if they do, they're certainly not cool.
Right.
And so I was uncomfortable with this word that, one, I'd never heard of, and two, I don't even, you know, where it came from. You know, whereas it ends up, we know it's a Shane line, but I remember on the day asking friends, like, hey, can I, like, look, I don't say not, like, I don't even know what that word, I get what it's supposed to be, but no one says that.
Right.
Can I change that? Like, you know, and because, you know, my West Coast cool Southern California slick, but, you know, wouldn't say this word that I don't know what it is. I just felt goofy.
Well, it didn't.
And
Sorry,
what I didn't know, what I didn't realize until years later, after hearing Ryan Lambert tell a story about costuming, when we were prepping to start shooting, and this is a very quick kind of backstory, but it hits home, and I love the fact that we figured this out, or have the realization of it as adults. Ryan was trying on jackets with the costumer, you know, to be Rudy, and like the jacket he wears in the movie was like the third or fourth one he puts on, and the costumer said, that's it. I think that's it. That one's good. And Ryan was like, no, I don't know. I don't like that. This isn't me. And she looked at Ryan and said, that's okay, hon. You're not playing you. And I think I translated that years after I heard that story. It took me forever to realize it. You know, when I asked Fred if I could change Nards to something else, his deft answer, which was great, and I remember, it's like, that's fine. I understand. Let's try it like it is on the page. And then maybe we'll try one or two later with something else. And what he was telling me in the same result, but in a different manner, was that's okay if Andre doesn't know this word or doesn't use it. Sean Crenshaw does.
Right.
Yep.
And that's something that you learn. And I thought that was a great lesson that didn't land for 20 something years. And, but you know, that's what it is. And thank the maker, you know, as 3PO would say, that we did, because it became, you know, Wolfman's got, I said, kick him in the nards. Horace says, Wolfman's got nards becomes the line of this movie that everybody knows. It's sampled in German DJ albums. I mean, it's all over the place. And, you know, you would never have the greatest title to a documentary ever. So
yeah.
I mean, there is no other option. So
no. And here is the proof.
Kick him in the nuts!
Kick him in the Nards! He doesn't have Nards! Do it! Do it! Wolfman's got Nards! Come on!
One of those moments.
I'll tell you, when we first started taking this movie out in those cast reunion screenings, or going on an Alamo Drafthouse tour, or going to, the Denver Film Society, being invited by like Keith Garcia to do this one-off screening, and there's 200 something people in this old twin theater, and that line comes up and the whole place erupts. You realize that's something.
Yeah.
You feel the anticipate, like people are waiting for Brent to say that line, and then they just go absolutely ballistic when it happens.
We have a few questions here from the viewers. Matt Movie 611 says, my favorite scene in the movie is Sean and his dad talking on the roof. Andre, do you have a particularly favorite moment from the film?
I think one of my favorite scenes, I've always said, is with David Proval in the airplane. I think it's a great scene.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not in it. No one else, none of the kids are in it. I think it's a great scene. But I think probably one of the better scenes in the movie is the bathroom scene with Sean and his dad, which technically culminates as a payoff to that setup on the roof, like Matt said. One, everybody wanted to be able to climb on the roof and watch a drive-in theater in their backyard. Yeah, that would have been cool.
Sure.
And then to have your dad come out and actually not yell at you for being on the roof, but to actually join you and eat your fries.
Yeah.
I thought that was a really cool kind of father-son moment.
Mm-hmm.
I've always liked that scene between Sean and Del.
I have a quick question and also an observation about that scene. The observation is, as far as tactile scenes in movies, when he hands him that late 80s Burger King, I can smell that and taste that scene.
Yeah.
It just Burger King hit differently coming out of those white, orange, and yellow wrappers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But also, where was this movie? Where was the movie supposed to be set? Because I've read that it's Louisiana because of the swamp, and I've also read that it's supposed to be California.
Well,
and when they're on the roof, you see the matte painting, and there's like big hills and mountains in the background, and it's like, where is this?
Well, I think officially what's great is that there's more than one location that, can have swampy, mossy kind of weird stuff right behind the house or within, BMX bike distance. It's almost sort of the ET effect, that we see, which always chaps my butt because those trees and the hills aren't behind that neighborhood, because that literally was the neighborhood I grew up in where they shot ET. It's actually it may feel Louisiana-ish. I think we have a town square, and I think there's a Confederate soldier in the middle of it, so it's probably something like that. But that was really the backlot of Warner Brothers. That's a very famous town square. It's called Main Street on Warner Brothers lot, where they shot The Music Man, where they shot Dukes of Hazzard, where they shot the Gilmore Girls, and like 75 other major things.
Yep.
But it's really any town USA. It's not supposed to be a particular spot. It's supposed to be, like we were saying at the beginning, it's like, that's my town. I could live there. That could be where I live, and my buddies get in the treehouse.
So they purposely kept it nondescript, right? It's
nondescript, kind of delineated. You're not seeing like the St. Louis Arch, or you're not seeing the Statue of Liberty or something. So,
Dom Collects asks, will we ever get action figures from this classic?
A guy whose handle that's collects, that's an appropriate question, I think, right? Look, when it comes down to merchandise, from what I can surmise and what little I know about it, it's connected to also why there was a remake going on for a little bit, why there hasn't been a lot of other content in the Monster Squad, quote unquote, universe. It's always a rights issue.
Right.
And the rights had always been a little confused, a little lost, because we actually dealt with that during production of the documentary. There is a thing that happens after a certain amount of time where rights revert. And I think we're near that time. So I don't know. I'm not involved in any of that. But, hopefully something like that comes of it, and maybe people get some cool stuff because, time works in our favor sometimes.
And Oliver really wants to ask, and I know this is a common thing, do you have a movie prop from Monster Squad that you got or were given as a memento during the filming?
Well, there's kind of two sides to answer that, Oliver. One is I got a couple things, but the main thing is I got my entire wardrobe.
Oh,
and
nice.
I still have it, and I have the actual Stephen King Rules shirt that was worn in the film, and that stayed in a box in a plastic bag for 30 years or so, and it finally came out when we were shooting the documentary. And if you watch that kind of like tag at the end with the credits, that shirt actually comes out. Right. And people lose their mind seeing the actual screen worn Stephen King Rules shirt, because who knew that was going to that ridiculous shirt that was really just a character description on the page of a screenplay that a costumer said, "Oh, I've got to go make this. Let me get my iron-ons," and made the shirt by hand. Who knew that was going to become a piece of film iconography after many years? Yeah, and people make their own. They change the colors. So I have the wardrobe, Oliver. That's actually pretty badass, and I have displayed that during 2 events during production of the documentary, which was pretty cool. I actually put them on mannequins and display, doing a bunch of memorabilia and stuff. But kind of the cool thing that I ended up actually getting that was a prop was Rudy's bow.
Oh, nice.
And I had that for years because I was actually, before Monster Squad and during, I was actually into archery and shooting bows and arrows and stuff. And Ryan learned how to shoot a bow in my backyard, actually. So we went in the bag. He's like, "Oh, you got to come to my backyard." And I said, "Hey, I'll take that." It was a Hoyt Easton. It was actually a Rambo. It was a brand, a model called Rambo, because Rambo had just come out and was super popular. And I had that for years. And one year, I think it was like 2013 or 14, I was like, you know what, this is Rudy's bow. Like Ryan, like we've been doing all this stuff. Ryan needs this bow. It should be displayed. This is a Rudy thing. And we were at a big screening at the amazing Castro Theater in San Francisco, and I surprised Ryan and the audience with the bow, and I gave it to Ryan. And,
oh, wow.
But I was staying at a friend's house, and Ryan was riding the subway to his apartment. He's like, "I can't take this back with me. Can you bring it back to your friend's house?" And I said, "Sure." And in true Ryan Lambert fashion, he never came and got it. And 5 years later, my friend left and moved to Montana. So the bow went to Montana. I had to have it shipped. Like, we finally rescued the bow and got it back. And it's now hanging in a place at our friend Sierra Nieli's, who's a big animator and producer. He's actually in the documentary. He's a EP, an animator on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the TV show, and it's hanging it's like in a museum piece, like on loan from the treehouse of Ryan Lambert and Andre Gower.
Oh, that's
nice. The bow is kind of cool, and so that those were the cool things that I had, and then I actually have the actual business card that we made.
Oh, nice.
That's funny.
Which for us, we used to make copies of and give out every once in a while.
So it's funny you mentioned that, because part of our convention for Iconicon, we had a meetup of people on Monday, of fans that wanted to come and meet us and interact with us. And we have swag bags that we were loading with different things and exclusives. And my girlfriend and I, who's a huge fan of Monster Squad, April, who's moderating this right now, we were going to make those business cards, and we could not get a clear image of them because you have to slow down the movie, and it's like, and it just looks like it's handwritten. And we were we actually all teamed up and drew that in the classroom on set to make that card. So we all have some penmanship on that card. Oh, nice.
Well, speaking of the bow,
Skaggs, come and get it.
I don't believe this.
that guy's like I'm not saying that you're not the MVP of the Monster Squad. You're the leader. But that guy, I mean, if Duke is the leader of G.I. Joe, of which you are Duke, that guy's like Snake Eyes. Like every time he's stopping bullies from messing with, the kids that get picked on in school. He doesn't have to. He just does because he's intimidating. And then he decides, I'll make bullets and shop, and then I'll take out monsters. Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, he does all the heavy lifting for taking out those monsters.
Yeah, he really does.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's two things. One, I love that sequence cinematically. I think it's a gorgeous sequence of shots. And ironically, like I was mentioned before, that is a payoff or a recall to a scene that got cut from the movie from the very beginning. And some people have seen that deleted footage, and some people haven't.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, Ryan is Rudy. I don't know if you guys know. Some of your kind of attendees and listeners may or may not know, but I never auditioned for the role of Sean.
Uh-huh.
And I originally auditioned and screen tested and went to all my meetings for the role of Rudy.
Mm-hmm.
And I know why I didn't get Rudy. Because Ryan Lambert came in and murdered his auditions and became Rudy in that moment, as he should have, because he is Rudy. Could I have played Rudy? Sure. Like my body of work leading up, that was, I always say this, the cool kid with great hair and a lot of hair product, maybe a leather jacket in there.
Right.
And that's how I auditioned that role. Ryan, brought a whole other level to it. Ryan Lambert is cool. I mean, he is.
Well, he was a teen idol at that point, where he was on Kids Incorporated and
sure. I mean, we both were sort of the same thing, but we had a different vibe. But I'd always actually played that role, and that's why I got the audition for it, because my body of work leading up to it. And what happened, I still don't know the answer, but somebody in the group, whether it was Fred or Shane or Peter Hyams or Penny Perry, the casting director, or somebody, or maybe it was an assistant sitting in the back of the room, when they got it all cast and they had known, and they were trying to figure out to cast as Sean, somebody said, "Hey, what about that kid we read as Rudy? What if we take all the shit out of his hair and like put him in a shirt that doesn't fit real well and give him a terrible haircut? Could he be Sean?" And usually they say, "Yeah, let's bring him back in and read for that and see if it worked." And they didn't do that. They just straight cast me as Sean off my Rudy auditions. And I still don't know the dynamic or that sequence of events, but whoever that was, I owe you a lot. And that's just a really cool thing to be in. But yeah, Ryan really brought a different level, I think. We've seen the kind of the stronger kid, the older kid, the bodyguard, My Bodyguard with Chris Makepeace back in the day, and Josh Brolin and the older kid that is a little bit more capable or less fearful. But Ryan, I think, brought an interesting kind of vulnerability to Rudy. And he's like, why is this kid? He doesn't even go to the school. Why is he rolling up and saving Horace? But he's the cool kid. Like, he should be the rebel. Like, he should be the one bullying kids. Like, because that's how he looks. And that's not what Rudy is.
Right.
And Rudy never swears. He never calls Horace fat kid. He saves his butt from the bad guys. He does commit larceny by stealing the bow and arrow, but it's okay. He's a little rebel. We don't know what his home life is like, and he's not the cool kid. I think he's the leather jacket and the hair and the sunglasses. Ryan, I think those are all facades for Rudy, and he just really also needed to fit in somewhere and figure out what his role is in something important. And he probably wasn't getting that at home and didn't have that when he was the year or two before in school. And it doesn't matter when you find your tribe, just as long as you find your tribe.
Yeah.
And I think, Rudy comes in there and realizes that I can fit in here, and I can help. I can help.
Yeah.
I always look for the helpers.
Well, it's notable in this film that there's this moment where there's a juxtaposition here. First and foremost, I need to mention, between the adults and the way they perceive the world and kids. And while that's not new to movies about kids versus their parents, Goonies has some of that in it, everything else. In Monster Squad, there's a very different dynamic going on, where the adults are focused on their own problems, domestic arguments at home, job issues, career issues. And they also are so by the book that they don't consider the possibility that these monsters are real. But it also detaches them from the world in it's kind of like the message of Blade Runner, where it's like you get to a certain age and you're jaded and you've forgotten how to be human. Mm-hmm. And there's this moment in the film that doesn't involve any of the kids, and I'll just play it real quick and then. There is no time or even attempt to mourn his partner, and he just keeps going through the motions. The father just keeps going through the motions. Meanwhile, Sean, your character, and Horace and the other kids are in that house, and Frankenstein gets crushed under all of this, these beams and everything, and they're like, help, we got to help the monster, we got to help the monster. And Sean says, don't call him a monster. And I don't know, I find that to be really, really smart writing, and it in a way it really shows. And then you see it at the very end where your character's sister gives the Frankenstein the stuffed animal as he's getting sucked back into the portal. There's this idea that, much like in Blade Runner, where it's the replicants teaching humans how to be human again, in this movie, it's children teaching adults how to be human again.
Yep.
Which I find fascinating. Really, really well written. Was that something that you've become aware of, or am I just like, waffling on, intellectually, finding things that aren't there?
No, I think it's very there, especially with Frankenstein's monster, because remember, it's not called the monster; it's Frankenstein's monster. Like, that creature did not ask to be who he is.
Right.
He got made, like he's in a situation that he didn't ask for. He was a dead guy that got literally Frankenstein to put together. This is where we get, these terms.
Sure.
And it's a classic, tale of, someone else literally stitching something together for their own selfish purposes that may or may not be good. Even though the accomplishment is amazing, is the end result good? Is Dr. Frankenstein any better than Robert Oppenheimer? We keep having these as we go through different eras of time. I think the fact that Sean says don't call him a monster is because he's not. All the other ones are monsters. Like, they didn't really have, but they don't really have a choice. Frankenstein's the one that has a choice. I think Duncan Regehr brings an interesting tale to his character approach as well. That Dracula is Arch. He's that guy. But he used to be a guy.
Right.
And somehow got bit by another one and then became this guy. And so did he really want that? Is he tired of it? So there's some vulnerability, but he's Arch. He's got a mission. He doesn't care. I love the fact that our Dracula is just so pissed off this entire movie and doesn't care because he's got his focus. And I realize why I came to a conclusion, in my own kind of fan fiction theory of this, all this backstory with these characters. And I think they're both great, but it's certainly a message, whether it was intended or not, to realize who you're calling what and why.
There's first of all, thank you, your Muslim uncle, for the super chat. He says, I loved you in Monster Squad when I was a kid, and most recently I enjoyed you and your insights in Search for Darkness.
Well, thanks. That's it was an epic documentary on horror movies of the 80s, and I was certainly appreciative of David and all that crew asking me to join, because in that documentary, as anybody saw it, it's 12 hours long. They had some big names and some heavy hitters, and I was really kind of even flabbergasted that anything that I would say actually got into a final cut of that thing with all those heavyweights. So that was certainly fun to be in. I appreciate it. And I'm glad you enjoyed Monster Squad as a kid.
RF Biker Scout would like to know, can you talk a bit about the television shows you were involved in as a regular? Baby Makes Five, Fathers and Sons, and Mr. President.
Yeah, all great memories, and I think great shows that just didn't get past the first or second season, which happens to be my television resume. It's like I was the I was the kid who did so much television work, and people like they're agog at it. They're like, you look at your resume, your IMDb page, and it's all these television shows, and I'm like, yeah, that's a lot. But there's a reason, is because I was the kid who got to do 7 or 8 TV shows that only went 1 or 2 seasons instead of one show that went 10 years that everybody knows you from.
Right.
And so there's a trade-off there. But look, Baby Makes Fives was a really funny sitcom that I thought the cast was great. It was the network was giving Peter Scolari his own show right after the ending of Bosom Buddies. And this is before, what's that guy? The other guy? Tom something?
Tom
Hankerman?
Yeah.
Tom Hankerman? Tom Hanks Spanks? Something. Before he became a thing in Bachelor Party and Splash, they gave Peter his own network show to be the lead on. And there's a lot of cool story about how we got that show, and We shot the pilot, and then we got picked up for 4 or 5 more episodes. This is all back old TV days where you have traditional seasons. And one of my favorite things I ever did. Peter's one of my favorite humans on the planet. He passed away earlier this year. But I know how to juggle because of Peter Scolari, and we used to perform together and warm up the audience. And Peter's the reason that I was introduced and got to do Circus of the Stars twice. Because he took me over them and said, look, this kid's athletic. He's coordinated. You should give him some sort of workout and put him in next year's show. And they did. And I did. And I got to do it twice. And I owe that all to Peter Scolari. So if you ever enjoyed something that Peter did, we're in the same squad.
I was going to ask you about Circus of the Stars because I know you did that. But yeah, that's a good segue into that.
That's a whole other weird world that you get in and you're a part of it forever, which is amazing. Fathers and Sons was talk about another ensemble show about a group of kids. It happened to be about 4 boys. I thought the show was really good and a little ahead of its time. But it was a network show on NBC with big heavy hitter kind of TV names like Michael Zinberg, who's still around, directing. He's like everybody's big tentpole network director, but he was a big EP from the 70s with Maude and all these other shows. And Randy Zisk was a young producer at the time, and now he's a super heavyweight network television still. And I ended up working with those 2 guys on a number of shows because I was sort of under this kind of working kind of development kind of deal off the 20th Century Fox lot, and got to do a bunch of shows with these guys. And if any one of them had taken it off, it would have been fantastic, but we just kept going from show to show. Fathers and Sons I thought was really good because it was about a show about the relationship between 4 boys and their fathers. And we hadn't seen anything really like that. And unfortunately, unfortunately it had kind of very stereotypical, characters. Again, I was the cool kid, great hair, leather jacket, cool clothes. Hence leading a couple years into Rudy stuff. And Merlin Olsen was coming off of Little House on the Prairie, Father Murphy, and he was one of the leads as the father of the redheaded kind of, bigger kid. And I was the cool kid, and my parents were divorced in this show. And that was sort of the basis of our storyline. And my dad was sort of the absentee father and the one that was sort of like would always flake. And we shoot the pilot, and the big get for the network was my father was none other than Ricky Nelson.
Oh, wow.
And so Ricky Nelson was returning to television for the first time since Ozzie and Harriet. And, being this national worldwide icon. And we shoot the pilot. It airs. They pick up the show for 5 more episodes going into the latter half. And then if that tests well, then we do a full run the next season. Well, in between the pilot and shooting the first of the next episodes, Ricky Nelson dies in a plane crash.
Oh.
And kind of kills the star power of the show. Even though we continued with those 5 episodes, and we kind of had to rewrite the fact that my dad just is literally absent and always flakes on me. It's not a show anymore. So they brought in the actress named Susan Walden, and she was fantastic. And I did another show with her later. But it kind of killed the star power and the gravitas of that show of having Ricky Nelson return to network television. And then talk about star power on network television. I can't remember the guest name that mentioned it, but Mr. President. I mentioned those shows with Zinberg and Zisk on the Fox lot, the actual movie lot. Leading up, I did a bunch of episodics. I did 2 or 3 television shows, including a thing called Heart of the City, which I actually played the criminal. There was 2 kids on the show, but they were the son and daughter of the lead, and I played the criminal of the show.
Right.
And, greasy hair and leather jacket and kind of a street punk. And he arrests me in the first episode. And then I have the storyline throughout the series. And the 3 kids on that show. And then Monster Squad happened the next year. Because that show only went 1 season as well. Monster Squad happens next year. And then in 87, 88, Fox becomes the 4th network. And because of the legacy of all the stuff that we had done leading up to that, all 3 of those kids on that Heart of the City show, which was a Michael Zinberg, Randy Zisk show, got shows on Fox, the new network.
Oh, wow.
And the other one was Jonathan Ward, who ended up doing The Adventures of Beans Baxter. And the other one was Christina Applegate.
Oh, man.
Who ended up doing Married with Children. I happened to get offered two shows when Fox was a new network, and when you put them side by side, one of them was being produced by John Company. Ed Weinberger was this huge television producer who did Taxi and all these, and Soap and all these these huge shows, and it was starring George C. Scott, and it was guaranteed to go 2 seasons. At the time, they were paying above scale, so it was good contract and good money at the time, even for me. And George C. Scott would only do a television show if he was the highest paid actor ever in the history of television. And so George C. Scott was getting at this time, $500,000 an episode to do this.
Wow.
And that was sort of his parameter. And then right down the street on the lot, Ted Danson was like, "Hey, we're on the #1 show ever. I want $1 million." And that started that whole thing. But Mr. President was, at the time, that was the greatest choice. I mean, talk about TV icons, Conrad Bain, that brought in Madeline Kahn, and you're sitting there with George C. Scott, who is kind of like a deity in film.
Sure.
And that was quite an experience.
What was that like working with somebody of his caliber?
It was very intense, and sometimes it was very loving. Super intense guy. Suffered no fools. If he didn't like it, he would just leave. I mean, it was a little rough. There was some contention there. But great stories, actually funny people. And I wish I remembered more of the crazy stories just sitting around that those just icons would sit around and tell. It was a little weird that, when the star of the show physically bans the executive producer who owns the show, from the stage. So they weren't allowed to come on the stage because all they would do was argue. But so that was interesting. But I learned a lot, and learned I've talked about it a few times because I learned a very valuable lesson on acting for the camera with other actors from George C. Scott one time when I was 14. And that's burned in my brain and my ass, and I'll never forget that. Well, because when you get you can bleep this, but when you get "Mother" by George C. Scott for 5 minutes at the top of his lungs, you tend to retain the information.
It's a trial by fire.
Yeah.
But I mean, certainly was a really good, intense experience that I wish that show had actually succeeded and gone on. I think it was doomed to fail from the beginning. But in its hindsight, because the other show that I got offered on Fox had nobody attached to it. The pilot wasn't guaranteed to air, and it wasn't paying well at the time. And then that show went on for 10 seasons.
Wow. We have a collector in the audience. This will actually allow me to jump into another related area of a question I wanted to ask based on your filmography. He asks a question for Andre. Do you know who owns the amulet green gem prop now?
Carlos, I do.
And it's probably secret.
And I'm not telling. No,
yeah.
It's actually, we were talking about the bow and the wardrobe. When we did that first cast reunion screening in Austin, Texas in 2006 at the Alamo Drafthouse, Fred Decker, I think there were 2 screen-used amulets that the prop department or art department had made. And Fred kept one. And a very good friend of ours now, and someone that we didn't know at the time, named Eric Vespi, who was a film writer, and now he writes for, I think he's still at Rooster Teeth or somewhere else, was working for a movie site. And he's one of the forces, along with the Alamo, that put together that cast reunion screening. And his favorite movie of all time is Jaws. We know that, but Monster Squad's very dear to Eric, who's also featured in the documentary, of course. And Fred brought the amulet to that screening to show the audience, and they all flipped out. And then he also gave it to Eric Vespi on the stage.
Oh, wow.
So Eric Vespi owns the one known actual amulet from the Monster Squad.
Wow.
That's awesome.
Well, that's the perfect intro to a question that I had for you. You're not only one of the faces of our generation of 80s cinema, but you're also one of the faces of our generation for a lot of 80s collectors, because your commercial filmography is expansive. And I recall you basically introduced us to a ton of the toys that we collected when we were kids. Just real quick, off the top of your head, can you name a number of the toy brands that you advertise, were in commercials for?
Yeah, the answer is all of them.
Okay.
No, I did a lot of work for Mattel. Over a number of years, so much so that there was a span of 3 or 4 years, I think it was, that Ogilvy and Mather, which is kind of the ad agency of the planet, like the biggest, they were the ad agency for Mattel, and you would actually go to their offices for auditions for Mattel commercials. And then if anybody's ever gone to an audition for a commercial, there's probably 25 kids in the room. They're all, you go in and you read the scene, and here's the action figure, and you read and go back and you get cast.
Right.
For a number of years, I never auditioned. I just sat in the room and read with all the kids because I was already going to be in these commercials. It was a very weird situation. Very cool, but I would just I would have to sit into the auditions with everybody else, and because I was already in, they were already bringing me in to do this commercial.
Right.
And that was just for that particular Mattel thing. I did a lot of other things as well, but toys. It's easy to go with Mattel because there was a line of toys for girls called Poochie, which was a little messaging kind of doll, stamp, like a dog that you could stamp messages for. I was the Poochie kid. I did probably a dozen Masters of the Universe commercials.
I was about to say, I remember a lot of He-Man commercials.
Yeah, I think I introduced, or in the commercial that I was in, Beastman. Possibly Manny Faces.
Wow.
I know I introduced Hordak. It's like Hordak, this is years later. And then a slew of others. Did a lot of Hot Wheels commercials. And then you do a lot of like soft drink commercials and things like that. But probably there was actually a rival kind of toy that when Transformers came out, it was called Tobot. And it wasn't as, it was kind of neat. It was like this little kind of like SUV kind of off-road 4x4 that turned into a robot. And that was kind of cool. And I remember doing that. Was it Voltron?
Oh yeah, Voltron.
Voltron had like a big, big thing with like shot little plastic thing that you shouldn't be shooting out of towards faces. And then, but when you, when I think probably, I actually ended up doing this very cool Nike commercial too for Nike basketball shoes. And it ended up being kind of like a cool, iconic commercial at the time. And the only thing that's still on YouTube is a chopped down version of that. But it was close to my heart because I remember the audition process, and I remember that the place where this audition take. This is how weird us kids in the business are. We remember where auditions were, right. And it called the original concept was for a kid who has a basketball with him everywhere, and I was a basketball player. And I'm 9 or 10 years old at the time, but basketball was starting to become my favorite sport, and I was playing big organized leagues and really enjoying it. And in this kind of context of this commercial for Nike, Maravich kid, where he had a basketball and dribbling it and does ball handling everywhere he goes, school, on the bus, like in the shopping center, in the grocery store, all this stuff. And that was the audition. And apparently, I guess not every kid that was reading for emerge could dribble a basketball well, and so I got the commercial. But the commercial ends up changing where the kid's not dribbling everywhere; he's always shooting a basketball.
I remember that commercial.
And it did kind of shoot. It was for and like he pokes out of the shower and throws the soap in a soap dish, and then like he's on a newspaper route and kind of makes a little juke move and tosses it into the basket. Yep. And what was really cool is there was a scene in a classroom and the kids are filing out. And the point of it is the kid jumps out of line and kind of does a pivot fadeaway, and with a and it's supposed to land in this wastebasket right in front of the camera. And so we did that a couple of times, and a lot of stuff it's rigged to where you throw it and they catch it in the basket so we can keep them. I said, yeah, so let's do that. So we did a couple. And what was awesome about this is he goes, okay, now we're going to try a gimmick. We have an apple on the corner of the teacher's desk. Do you think you could jump out of line? Do you think you could hit the apple with the paper? I said, I don't know. It's pretty tough. I was like, I know that's pretty hard. But let's try it. He goes, because we have it rigged with the filament. And when you hit it, we're going to pull it off the desk and the apple's going to go in the wastebasket. I was like, all right. We go shoot, pop out of line, turn around, pivot, fade away. I pop that apple right on the top when they pulled it in the wastebasket, and that's the shot they used for the commercial. So it was
wow, that's awesome.
But, that was probably one of my favorite commercials. I did a ton though. I mean, you get to like 60, 70 something commercials that you start to forget. You start to
Sure.
forget a lot.
Oh yeah, that's why I don't know if you have an answer for Eric's question, but he's asking, did you ever do commercials for video games?
Is Eric kidding?
No, I think
does he not know? This almost seems like it's scripted, Eric. So I'm gonna you're gonna be a part of something cool here. I'm most well known for doing the commercial for ET.
The ET Atari game.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
That's me.
Oh man,
I was about to say, as soon as you read that, I was like, wait, does he not know about the?
That's
a lot of people don't. They don't. So I'm glad Eric asked that, so we could talk about it and hopefully blow Eric's mind. So
that's got to be on record as the only good thing to come out of the whole Atari ET campaign. Is that commercial.
I have been blamed on YouTube for tanking Atari, the company. Well, no, sir, I was just the kid in the commercial. I did not make the game. There's a whole backstory to that. And,
they did a whole documentary about the Alamogordo landfill, and
it's a good documentary. Yeah, Zach Penn did that. It's called Game Over. It's actually fascinating. And I'm in it because they show the commercial. But
that's right.
I guess they fair used it because they didn't get a release form from me. So I don't know if Zach Penn owes me money or not. I'm not sure. If he does, I'll waive it. If Zach Penn, just invites me to lunch or something.
Oh yeah, just for a chat. Yeah, just for drinks.
But yeah, that was a huge commercial shoot. That was like 2-3 days on a sound stage. And I remember where that audition was too. I remember who the director was. And I love when conversations like this kind of connect and come full circle. Because I mentioned ET, I mentioned riding bikes in the neighborhood. Monster Squad, we have bikes. We all grew up BMX. We're talking about Bill Allen, rad.
Yeah.
Actually, and there's a rad connection of rad to me, and I used to be on the celebrity freestyle bike team when freestyle biking first started, and it was trying to be cool. And Eddie Fiola, who was sort of like the pro that was in rad, that was actually our instructor. So so I was on the celebrity freestyle bike team with David Faustino, Brian Green, Jeremy Miller, and Jenny Lewis.
Wow.
We used to have to travel around and do events, and we were not very good. But we used to meet in Brian Green's cul-de-sac, and Eddie would teach us tricks that we couldn't do. But anyway, so this ET commercial, there was a long story short is there's a bike obviously in the background of the shot. And I was a kid in my neighborhood and I had a little crappy dirt bike. It wasn't a brand name. It wasn't very good. And I saw that bike and it was actually a Mongoose. And if anybody's of our age at the time, Mongoose was like a middle grade, upper middle brand of bike. And if you had a GT or a Redline or a Diamondback, that was the creme de la creme of dirt bikes at the time.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And there was a Mongoose, and I was like, oh my God, I would love that bike. Like I could be much cooler if I had actual Mongoose. And I asked if I could buy the bike or have the bike or whatever. The production said, actually, it's a rental prop. Like we can't, it's just in the shot. Like we can't give it to you. We don't own it. And I was like, oh, okay, that's fine. And on the last day of shooting, it was actually like a 3-day shoot or 3 or 4 day shoot in this big production. And at the end, when we wrapped at this big celebration, and I remember all I saw was this thing of balloons coming towards me. And I was like, oh, they're giving me balloons. And I don't like balloons. And, but they were tied to the handlebars of this gorgeous red and gold Diamondback that they got from the bike shop in LA. And this bike was like a $400 bike in 83. Wow. And they gave me this Diamondback as a gift, and I just lost my shit.
Wow.
And so I had that bike for a decade. I mean, it was a gorgeous, but that was my dirt bike. And that was very, very cool. So I not only got to take away some good memories of being the kid in the ET Atari commercial, which I thought would be cool instead of ridicule. I got this bike, so at least I got something from it. And I actually got an Atari 2600 given to me by Atari, the rep. And she promised me when ET the game came out, because the game didn't exist yet. We played like this fake version on TV in the commercial. She goes, I'm sending you ET when it comes out and every other game in the catalog. I said, that's amazing. I never got any of it.
Oh, well,
I got my console. They gave me a console.
Well, Yesterland Toys wanted to ask if you got to keep any of the toys from the commercials that you were in. So I guess that you kind of answered that already.
I have a bike, but it's a different bike. So yes, I got a console from that, but not the one Screen used. It was actual. I have Tobot. I still have Tobot.
Nice.
I'd love to find that commercial. So any of you YouTube sleuths, find that one. Sometimes you can catch my bubble-headed, bad bowl cut hair on some toy commercials. Tobot, I actually still have. It's in a box in a storage unit.
I'm a vintage toy expert as well as Michael, as you can see all around us. I've never heard of that one.
I think it came out as like a thing that was trying to rival Transformers but I have it. It actually had a working wrench. It's kind of cool. Yeah.
Your old toys is asking if you ever did a Star Wars toy commercial.
No, but there is an old Star Wars toy story if anybody wants to hear it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So when I was 10, obviously, if I got the year right, maybe 9, I was fairly robust in the entertainment industry. I got invited to the Academy screening of the 3rd installment of George Lucas's movies. And at that time, it was called Revenge of the Jedi.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So I went to the Academy screening of Revenge of the Jedi, where the title said, all the material said Revenge of the Jedi. And if you were a kid and went to the screening, you actually got a swag bag of stuff. There was like a poster in there. There was a button, like we all had those like 3-inch kind of safety pin buttons that said Revenge of the Jedi. And there was a toy in a blister packs then. You had the cardboard box with like a plastic face, and there was a ship. And the box said Star Wars Revenge of the Jedi, and it was this transport ship that doesn't exist in the movie because they changed it. It's supposed to be the Imperial kind of transport ship that they go to Endor on, because it has these wings. But this thing was like square and clunky and had a big can on the front. Like the ship doesn't exist. Right. And I got this toy at the screening, and I didn't know 8 months later or whatever it is, or next year they're going to change the name of the movie and they're not going to have that ship in there. But I've been playing with this toy forever. So it's out of the only thing I have from that swag bag is that button. So I still have a button that says Revenge of the Jedi. I don't know where that ship is or that box. If I had kept it, I would have been retired many years ago.
So yeah, you'd have a big chunk of change for that thing right now.
I would have put all of you collectors in like the Coliseum and said, battle for this.
Yeah, Matt and I would have been sitting up at the back just eating popcorn, watching all those people battle it out. Wolfie wants to ask, was the fake version of E.T. any easier than the final one?
He knows the game. But yeah, I think even in the fake version, if you fell in the pit, you never got out. No, I had to act like I was playing the game, because this rep from Atari was there and had like a beta machine or something. They had some video footage of a game that they were like literally building as we speak. And it was just a little bit, so we had to pretend like we're like, oh, there's the and yeah, it looked just as bad when it was like a prototype than the actual game itself.
JSP has a question. He wants to know a little bit more about your television career. He says, completely off the Monster Squad topic, how was your experience working on The Twilight Zone?
Ooh, I mean, who doesn't want to do a Twilight Zone? I just was old enough to do an actual Rod Serling edition. But this is when they brought it back for the first time. I actually really liked this story. It was actually a Ray Bradbury story. And I do remember it was hot as balls shooting. It was in the summer out in the middle of north of LA by Six Flags, which is now a big, actually kind of where we shot the exterior pond stuff for Monster Squad, where the actual practical treehouse. It's a thing called Stevenson's Ranch. Now it's a big subdivision with schools and houses and everything. But what was cool about this is it was a period piece, and got to drive on this old like 37 Packard or Ford or something. And it was a story between this nephew and his aunt, and the aunt was Piper Laurie.
Oh, yeah.
And we encountered this old man in the middle of nowhere, and it was Robert's Blossom. And, I'm 9 or 10 years old doing this episode of Twilight Zone, and I don't know who Robert's Blossom or Piper Laurie are until, a few years later, I realized that these are icons of film in America. And I got to do an episode of The Twilight Zone with them. But what's awesome about that is one of my favorite people in the world, and not just in the entertainment industry, but because of my encounters, is a writer. He was a TV writer, and this was his first directing job. And his name was J.D. Feigelson.
Mm-hmm.
And he now lives in Louisville, Kentucky. And he made a movie that a lot of genre people love called Day of the Scarecrow. And he's working on the sequel. But I'll text JD if I'm in Louisville and we try to keep up. But for some reason, he really liked me as a kid performer, and he cast me in that episode. And we stayed. There's some great, kind of full circle here, because the director of photography on that episode of Twilight Zone was none other than Bradford May, who was the DP on the Monster Squad.
Oh, yeah,
full circle.
Dang, that's cool. That's awesome.
Well, speaking of full circle, we are pretty much at time. I think we've got maybe one more quick question.
Yeah. I have one more quick question and observation, really. There is a distinct similarity, Andre, between your real life persona and Sean in the Monster Squad. Not just the fact that you played him, and it's literally you, but there's one aspect of Sean's personality that I think has transcended into Andre's personality, your personality, and I'm sure you already had it in you, but Sean is always the person running into the problem, not away from the problem. He's always the one trying to solve it. He's not running from it. He has a lot of courage. He has a lot of natural courage, and you are always, it seems, you're running toward the challenge, whether it's, I didn't get to play the kid with the leather jacket, but now I'm playing Sean in the movie, and that's just fine. I'm gonna take on that challenge. In your personal life, you took on the challenge of a heart attack, and you beat that back. And then you took on the challenge of trying to help get this movie brought back, and then you went out and met all of these fans. And you talked a lot in our conversation tonight about how you were, the kid with, the good hair, the great hair, and the cool clothes. But even though Ryan did some of the physical stuff, you're always this character and this person, as we've grown up with you, that's never given up. And I want to play this one little moment from Monster Squad that perfectly encapsulates that, because a lot of people talk about the moment with Horace. They talk about the moments where Ryan's, shooting the bow and arrow. But this moment right here has got to be the most just fearless moment in the whole film. And I want to make it clear, the fearless moment was when you hit him with the bat. You basically teed up the werewolf so Ryan could kill him, and you did it like you were the younger kid in a dark warehouse, and this thing had already torn up God knows how many people. But I wanted to end on that moment, Andre, because, like I said, in your real life, you've also still been swinging that bat, and we really want to thank you for it.
That's going to take me a little while to process that. So I'm glad we're almost over. That's I really dig that. I appreciate. I went one of my best friends in college, his high school team a couple months ago when I was in Raleigh, and so shout out to my, the Batman to my Robin of William Coley at St. David's School, but. It was after the heart attack and after all the stuff and all the things that I've tried to do. And it's really just about perseverance. And I think people that do kind of, thrive looking at the challenge or trying to take on the difficult task, even if you get knocked down, you can get up. If you don't succeed, try again. It sounds corny and cliche, but we've all heard it, but we hear it because it's a real thing. I think I had that either naturally or instilled in me through great teachers and my parents. And maybe it all started from day one, because a lot of people know I was born premature. And in 1973, I actually had a respiratory condition that was the very first year that they started saving preemies that were born in that week. Because if you were born a year prior to that, you weren't making it. And so I struggled like the first 5 or 6 months of even being on the planet. And maybe I've just been scrapping at it ever since.
Well, I just want to thank you for continuing to swing and continuing to scrap at it. And also all of us, especially here in the studio, but out there, I can see the love as well. Really want to thank you for continuing to talk about your experience, your career, taking the time to do this tonight, and doing it for a virtual convention that's just trying to raise some money for charity. But really, really appreciate your time, Andre. Thank you.
Oh, I mean, I appreciate the invite. And I mean, how many people get to do this on the planet? Not many. So I appreciate it, and I feel very fortunate to be in this position.
Well, thank you. Everybody, please thank Andre in the chat. The next video will be at 8 o'clock. It's going to be a premiere here on Retroblasting. It's the My Complete Spider-Man Story is the title. So check that out for Iconicon 2022. Yeah. And Andre, if you wouldn't mind just staying around for 1 minute in the back room after we're done. I know Matt would just like to say something to you as a lifelong Monster Squad fan. I don't know if it's sappy or not, but we'll find out.
That's right.
But yeah, but guys, thank you. And we will see you on the next video, My Complete Spider-Man, right here on Retroblasting at 8 o'clock. Bye, everybody.